Well, Chris, the news unfolding. There's such a lot to say about it, but let's condense. It has now become very, very clear that there are major, major problems within the GNU, and in specific, the two major parties, the DA and the ANC, that are keeping that bridge alive. But it seems to be that old movie, the bridge over the river Kwai. It's being attacked. It's not stable. But Chris, may I tell you, speaking to several of the stakeholders, here's the following. No matter what happens, there are two people that are very much the glue and the people that have put, I think, their political career on that stability. And one would be Cyril, believe it or not, and the other one, John Steenhuisen. Those are the two people who carry that crown, which is obviously heavy on the head. So let's unpack it, Chris. Until yesterday's very clear line in the sand from John Steenhuisen at the DA press conference, where in specifically the two people that are under attack, but more Dean McPherson, declared their statement and their points of view for the first time unilaterally, not as ministers of the cabinet, but as people in the DA. So yesterday was a DA conference, but let's reverse. It now becomes apparent that Cyril Ramaphosa goes ahead without informing these people in the GNU, in specifically John Dean McPherson and those odds and sods that make up the cabinet, that he was going to sign the land exploration bill. This is shocking, not because this is a matter of, I forgot and will brief you later, but in my opinion, a direct, calculated scenario of embarrassing the people who are actually going to have to put it to the test and to the road. But in my opinion, Cyril was influenced to do so that he could garnish a couple of extra support. Can you imagine sitting in Davos as the leader of the formal opposition, a cabinet minister, and you get told this huge bill being signed on social media? What is more shocking, Chris, is that the minister who will have to take that bill and implement it is Dean McPherson. And now it comes out that Minister McPherson, who also is under attack and will get there, is currently saying that about a month or few, he actually got legal opinion that the current bill as signed by the president is not carrying constitutional muster. And what does Cyril do? He takes that document and puts it into pile Z and signs it, irrespective of advice from the cabinet minister who will have to go and make it constitutional. So that is the litany of what happened in this week. And now we've got a matter where John strongly came out. But we have to understand, Chris, he can't just now throw toys out of the car. He has to now go to the table and see if he can save the GNU. And that's why he used the words yesterday verbatim. We will have to ask the president to reset the GNU. And that is where we left yesterday's total litany of the land exploration bill. And then lastly, Chris, on this matter, Dean McPherson stands his ground, goes out and says, I am not going to implement this act in my department. And not a day later, Paul Mashatile, who is still under a cloud of absolute scrutiny, comes out and threatens Dean McPherson and says if he does not want to implement the laws of this country, then he must resign as a minister. And typical Dean comes back and says, Yo Moor, I won't resign. That is up to the member and leader of the DA. So that's where we are. The GNU currently standing in this grey matter, and John, rightfully so yesterday, invoking what they call Clause 19, in the discussion document and the contract document, which means they are calling for a formal dispute.
Thank you very much, Karabo, and thank you very much to all of you who've come out today on the Saturday to come and listen to what we have to say about this very important issue. Ladies and gentlemen, 7 months ago, South Africans were imbued with a sense of great hope and optimism when the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance came to an agreement and signed a statement of intent to herald a new era of government in South Africa, a government based on coalition, a government based on power sharing. The statement of intent was the document and the basis upon which we gave our support to President Cyril Ramaphosa and voted him into office as the President of the Republic of South Africa on the 14th of June 2024. It was also the basis upon which we entered government in order to keep out the destructive policies of the MK party and the economic freedom fighters, and to contribute to building a better South Africa, a better future, and a better life for all South Africans. This came about after the voters and the people of the Republic of South Africa voiced their dismay with the ANC over their chronic service delivery failures, over the corruption, and over the missteps in government. In doing so, the voters of South Africa deprived the ANC of a majority for the first time in 30 years. Through their votes, the people of South Africa indicated that they wanted parties to work together to build a better South Africa. And I think this point is one which is absolutely worth emphasizing. That this is not a project of politicians. It is an expression of the will of the people of South Africa, who clearly said that they wanted parties to work together in a mutually respectful way to build South Africa and to ensure their interests were advanced. I'm proud to say that the DA continues to uphold our side of the bargain of that statement of intent. Portfolios that are under the control of DA ministers have done more to deliver progress in those ministries in the last 7 months than we've seen the ANC achieve in the last 30 years. Every single day, DA ministers, DA deputy ministers, presiding officers in Parliament, House chairpersons in the NCOP and committee chairs get out of bed more determined than ever before to build a more inclusive, prosperous and free South Africa. That is why we are in government, and that is what we are delivering. And this is precisely because we have heard the cry of the people for constructive cooperation, that the DA treats our fellow coalition partners and colleagues from other parties in a 10-party GNU with respect, making constructive suggestions aimed at resolving disagreements rather than inflaming them. As a result of all of this, the green shoots have started appearing in our economy and in the employment statistics. The rand has strengthened, and international analysts have hailed the formation of the GNU as South Africa's most significant moment since 1994. The recent World Economic Forum in Davos, from which I've returned from this morning, reflected the positive attitude of the world towards this political, magnificent political development. Every day since June 14 last year, the Democratic Alliance has made a concerted effort to ensure the success of the GNU. We have negotiated, we've compromised where needed, because as veterans of coalition politics, we know that no matter how large you are in a coalition, you don't always get your own way. You don't have 50% of the vote, which means that you cannot get everything that you want. At the same time, however, in various press conferences, we have made it abundantly clear that we were in government, in this GNU, to share power, not merely to make up the numbers, for the ANC to continue rolling out the same destructive policies and proposals that have landed South Africa in the situation that it has found itself over the last 2 decades. Now, any coalition agreement is premised on the acknowledgement that the larger party will, of course, have to be prepared to negotiate and compromise where needed, because all parties in the government of national unity represent the interests of a minority. However, after a very promising start whereby President Ramaphosa delayed the implementation of the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act to enable negotiations to continue, recent weeks have made it increasingly clear that the ANC has lost interest in honouring its side of our relationship and statement of intent. Unfortunately, the ANC has taken to openly disrespecting coalition partners and undermining the very trust upon which a coalition agreement is built. In his statement at the January 8th anniversary, President Ramaphosa was quoted as saying that although the ANC failed to secure 50% plus one in the elections, the ANC is still in charge. Just today, the President opened the ANC's Lekgotla by saying that the GNU exists to implement the NDR, the National Democratic Revolution. Now, not only is a statement like this incorrect, it is immature, but it also does not accord to the letter and spirit of the statement of intent. Unfortunately, however, it does accord with behaviour of recent weeks. In the last week, the President not only disregarded the very serious constitutional objections raised by the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister Dean McPherson, over the expropriation bill, but he failed to even have the courtesy to inform the Minister about when he intended to sign the bill into force. Similarly, a few weeks ago, I personally wrote to the President about the contentious National Health Insurance Act, which, despite the fact that it was raised very clearly in the negotiations going into the agreement, despite the fact that there was agreement by all parties that there would be continued negotiations about it, we're met with TV screens at airports rolling out that the NHI is here. That does not accord to the spirit and intent of negotiation, compromise, and cooperation. In the correspondence that I addressed to the President, I made a number of constructive proposals for consideration because, as a Democratic Alliance, we want universal access to basic health care for all South Africans, regardless of their income. However, the NHI in its current form, which seeks to destroy private medical aids and tax credits and to launch an assault on the private medical sector, is not the way to go. If anything, Operation Vulindlela has shown us over the last few years, it is indeed a public-private partnership and cooperation that leads to greater successes in government. I made a number of these constructive proposals which set out very clearly our position on the matter, and I asked for a meeting with the President to further engage ahead of the upcoming Cabinet Lekgotla to prevent a repeat of the events from the previous Lekgotla, where we vehemently objected to the inclusion of the NHI targets in the documentation. Amazingly, the President refused to even meet with the leader of the largest party in the coalition to discuss the single most critical issue for the future of the GNU and for the future of South Africa. Instead, my letter was simply waved away and sent into the abyss of the health department. And that leads me to the next point, because the same place my letter was sent to has been met with a really odd response. Instead of engaging respectfully and maturely to find solutions, the ANC Minister of Health, Aaron Motsoaledi, declared war on the GNU in front of the world at Davos this week. Motsoaledi told world leaders assembled at the World Economic Forum that he is fighting what he called a war against the people of South Africa who don't want their private medical aids expropriated and who don't want higher taxes to fund a new looting scheme and who don't want to see our healthcare system in South Africa destroyed. This is not how mature colleagues behave, that is not how you negotiate, and that is not how you compromise. It is arrogant and it is deeply disrespectful, not only to the Democratic Alliance, but to the other parties, to the Government of National Unity, who have also expressed their concerns about the NHI and who are also patiently waiting for a negotiation around this particular matter. It is a symptom of a continued lack of respect accorded to coalition partners as well as to the founding agreement. And most importantly, from international experience and local experience, this is not how healthy coalitions work. Whether the ANC likes it or not, the stability of this government, as well as the security of the President's own position, depends entirely on the relationship between the two largest parties to the Government of National Unity. In keeping with our mature approach to coalition government, the Democratic Alliance is therefore urgently seeking to pursue a reset in this relationship. To do so, I yesterday wrote directly to President Ramaphosa to do the following things: to object in the strongest possible terms to the fact that he simply signed the Expropriation Act this week in contravention of a clear legal opinion and concerns submitted by the Minister of Public Works that the Act is in fact unconstitutional and could quite easily be remedied by sending it back to Parliament. Secondly, to note the DA's implacable opposition to the inclusion of the NHI, and particularly the proposals to start to move to eliminate private medical aid and the continued assault on the private healthcare sector in South Africa contained in the documentation of the Medium-Term Development Plan, with, of course, the accompanying budgetary implications of this. Bear in mind again, we are in government to see economic growth and job creation and an end to poverty in South Africa. Every policy, every law, every initiative by government should be measured through the lens of the following things. Will this help grow the economy? Will it create jobs? And will it help lift more South Africans out of poverty? And finally, to record the failure to set up of now an effective dispute resolution mechanism, as well as the clear abuse of the clearinghouse mechanism, which still does not have adopted terms of reference going forward. But most importantly, I notified the President that I was now invoking Section 19 of the Statement of Intent. Clause 19 was specifically put in place to deal with situations where disagreements within the coalition arose. Clause 19 codifies the procedure to be followed when differences arise between parties to the Government of National Unity. Clause 19.3 states, and I quote, "Sufficient consensus exists when parties to the GNU representing 60% of seats in the National Assembly agree," unquote. The only parties that represent 60% of the seats in the National Assembly are the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance. In the event of a lack of sufficient consensus, The statement of intent in clause 20 continues, the parties to the GNU shall also establish dispute resolution or deadlock breaking mechanisms in instances where sufficient consensus is not reached. The President needs to accept, along with this party, that the ANC does not have a majority in South Africa. They are now just another minority party, and that the DA are partners in the GNU. We won over 3.5 million votes in the last election, and we are in government to represent our voters and to rescue South Africa by growing the economy and creating jobs and ending poverty. If we cannot fulfill this mandate within the GNU and are treated merely as a doormat or treated as simply there to make up the numbers, we have to seriously consider our next steps. The DA, and I want to be very clear about this, the DA will not be reduced to being mere spectators in a government of which we bring a large part of the seats. I want the people of South Africa to know that the DA does not take this step lightly. We understand the grave implications, not only for politics, but for the future of governance in South Africa. The seriousness of this situation demands that we do engage other parties in the GNU too, who, like us, have publicly come out against the acts of the recent week, and particularly the IFP, who have now come out very strongly against the Expropriation Act too. We are invoking Clause 19 in pursuit of an urgent reset in the relations, because South Africa deserves a functioning coalition where partners treat each other with respect in pursuit of the solutions to the country's many pressing problems. The solutions must work to undo the failed policies of the past 30 years and set South Africa sailing on a new path of hope, prosperity, and opportunity for more South Africans. It is also not good enough to stand on the world stage and take the bouquets for the formation of the GNU if you are unwilling to domestically put in the hard yards that are required to make coalitions work. Under the GNU now, it is time for a reset that treats all parties to the GNU as key players in the decision-making processes of this government and the policies and practices that it will pursue. It is also a time for new policies and for a new direction for South Africa, away from the failed policies of the past, and that is precisely why the GNU was met with so much hope and excitement. And is that hope and excitement that we wish to give a greater opportunity to through a reset in these relations. If the reset is not possible and we remain unable to be able to play our part in the growth and jobs agenda, if our ideas, if our solutions are merely waved away with the hand of the National Democratic Revolution, then we too will have to reconsider our options and how to best serve South Africa in this situation. It is my fervent hope that the coming week will see a coming together of the ANC and the DA, as well as the leaders of other parties, to adopt a far more cohesive, collaborative partnership towards governing South Africa and to implementing a new policy agenda that will bring the jobs we need, that will grow the economy in the way we need it to grow, and which will lift millions of our citizens out of poverty and into a new era of hope, opportunity, and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karabo, and to John, our leader, and colleagues here. Let me start off by saying that I am in government at the behest of my party, Democratic Alliance, and I'm here to serve the interests of my party and the 3.5 million voters that sent us into government, and to serve the broader interests of the public. And one of my priorities is to always ensure that the Constitution is upheld, respected, and implemented. And so it was that in mind, and with my oath of office that I took to be a faithful counsellor to the President, I embarked on a consultation with his office regarding the expropriation bill then, to ensure that I was satisfied with the advice that he may have received in the 6th administration, and to ensure that my office was on the same page in terms of its legality or constitutionality. With that in mind, on the 5th of December, I provided the President with a comprehensive legal opinion by one of South Africa's foremost senior counsels in public law, which outlined a fatal constitutional problem with the then bill. I suggested to the President, in terms of my counsel, that he should refer the then bill back to Parliament in terms of Section 79(1) of the Constitution, to ensure that those issues and those fatal defects in the bill were rectified. On the 21st of January, I received a letter from the President to simply say that after careful consideration, the bill meets constitutional muster. 2 days later, via a social media post, I became aware that the bill had in fact been assented to. That was the first time I became aware of it. It was the first time that the leader of my party became aware of it, and the partner of the second largest party in the government of national unity. What is clear, however, is that individuals with my department were either tipped off or made aware that the bill was going to be assented to, because there was a press release ready that was not authorized by myself or my office, which in fact completely contradicted the President's own press statement, spoke about greedy landlords, spoke about evicting people, farm workers being able to claim land, talking about taking land from people, and so on. There were also a number of graphics that had also been prepared. Now, never in the history of government has anyone other than the Minister responsible for legislation communicated on that particular piece of legislation. So it was incredibly unfortunate and regrettable that myself, as the Minister who had taken the opportunity to counsel the President in terms of my oath of office, was not taken into confidence that the bill would be signed or assented to, but other people were. That being said, it's important that I highlight what was found to be unconstitutional with the bill. And I'll take you through the points as in a lay process as best as I can. But if effectively there is a contradiction in the sequencing of how expropriation is supposed to take place between Section 7, 8, and 19. Section 19 envisages that where the expropriating authority and owner do not agree, that the amount of compensation to be paid, that there is a process to take place. That firstly, the parties must attempt to settle the dispute by mediation. If they are unable to settle the dispute by mediation, either party may, within 180 days of the date of the notice of expropriation, institute proceedings for a court to decide or approve the amount of just and equitable compensation. So either parties can follow that process. The disputing party may, within 90 days of the date of the notice, request the expropriating authority to institute such proceedings. So the authority, the expropriating authority or the government, would have to go to court to get the court to determine just and equitable compensation. It's clear from these provisions that the envisaged process to determine the amount of compensation must be instituted within 180 days, but Sections 7 and 8 require that by the time notice of expropriation is issued and served, the amount of compensation must already have been determined, and that the court process to approve or to determine the amount referred to in Section 19 is that contemplated by Section 8. Effectively, once that amount has been determined in terms of the 7 and 8 process, the individual who is affected must then go to court and go through the court process, which severely disadvantages them. It's very clear that both processes can't exist, that they are irreconcilable with an internal conflict between the provisions of 7 and 8 on the one hand and the provisions of Section 19 on the other hand. Let me put it differently, if I may. On the one hand, the amount of compensation must be finally determined before a decision to expropriate is made and a notice of expropriation is served. On the other hand, any court proceedings to decide or approve the amount of compensation, properly interpreted, may be made only after the notice of expropriation has served. It's quite clear then that the conflicting provisions are irreconcilable with each other and are thus unworkable, rendering the expropriation bill and act irrational, vague, and unconstitutional. The expropriation bill, just for that reason, is unconstitutional. The unconstitutionality that has been identified is on a range of levels, lead to other constitutional concerns that were previously identified in legal opinions provided to Parliament. So, these are just some of the examples of the constitutional problems in this Act, which could arise after any amendment of the bill to Parliament to cure the constitutional defect, which is why we suggested to the President that in terms of Section 79(1), that issue is confined and dealt with. And it was on that basis that I advised the President that the bill is unconstitutional. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not a matter of interpretation, but it is a matter of fact. You cannot have two contradictory processes to determine expropriation contained in one bill. It can only be one or the other. Now, I think it's important to also state that, as I said, I wasn't made aware of what these outcomes were. We had a plan to rectify it and to fix it. It was easily done. That the leader of the Democratic Alliance has now declared a dispute in terms of Section 19.3 of the Statement of Intent, and that must now be decided on the way forward. What I will say is that I think that legislation is far too important to be dealt with through acts of bad faith. I think that we cannot have situations where what happened this week becomes a norm or allowed to happen. We are partners. We are equal partners. And equal partners need to treat each other with respect and mutual respect. It cannot be that we have our own colleagues that seek to undermine, bomb the ship, and attempt to claim political mileage through these processes. That is why it was important that I went publicly and said that I will respect the foundations of the Constitution, that private property that the rights for any South African to own private property and for that property to be guaranteed will be non-negotiable for myself in terms of Section 25 of the Constitution. It is non-negotiable. And I'm not sure why so many people are angry by that, because they either don't believe or respect Section 25 of the Constitution, or they actually believe that the Expropriation Act is a foreground to land grabs, which is what some in the ANC have tried to paint this as in order to try and find favour with voters in the MKP or the EFF that they lost. And interestingly, even they have rejected that act. So whatever they're trying to do publicly is not working. So I will leave it there, Karabo and Billy, and obviously happy to take any further questions. And I hope that that does provide some background as to how we arrive in today's situation. Thank you.
Life of an artist, bacho xa besipayisisa, glorifying drugs as a stage fright cure. You can try this just when you're about to grab your chance of staging. Excitement, you can't think out this industry, or should I say this killer dream, cause you will swear that from the start it was designed to kill artists. Bangakulwela when days are bright, unguthembekile. As a human being on Instagram, ungxekekile. Too much pressure, unrealistic expectations. Whoever said that is the perfect ilizwi lahlekisile. Is with us, uthembekile. Singiza uthembekile. Remedies within us, ezikrwempa sibhebhekile.